As a real estate agent, it's inevitable that you'll end up selling a property held by a company. Here's everything you'll need to know. A common entity that we hold property in is different types of companies. And there's a few different kinds. We've got limited liability companies, we've got corporations, and we have partnerships, to name a few. There's a lot of different kinds. But each different kind of entity has their own formation documents and signing authority requirements. So different things that we need to look at to determine whether or not that company was properly created and whether or not our seller can sign on behalf of that entity. So how does this work? Well, again, we're going to look to Michigan laws. And more specifically, we're going to look at the Michigan Corporation Act and the Michigan Limited Liability Act. Our Michigan laws tell us and they dictate the process for how a company can be created and managed. So once again, how did we get here? How do we end up with a property being held by a company? Well, usually it starts with an idea, right? Somebody has an idea that maybe they would like to have a little bit of separation from their personal property, or maybe privacy from an ownership standpoint, and they want an LLC or a corporation to hold this particular piece of property. So oftentimes people can employ attorneys to create this entity on their behalf, or they can do it on their own. And so what's the first step in creating that entity? Well, first, you have to get it registered with the state of Michigan. So you're going to pick a name, pick an entity type, and then either file your articles of organization if it's an LLC, or your articles of incorporation if it's a corporation. And so they have to be filed, and you can't just submit them in, they also have to be accepted by the state of Michigan. Your company is not a valid entity until the state of Michigan has confirmed that entity has been created. It can take anywhere from a couple of days to a couple of weeks. So we want to make sure that we keep that in mind. And so once you have created this entity, it's a valid entity in the state of Michigan, next we're going to finish our corporate documents, such as an operating agreement or bylaws. These documents are not as regulated as articles of organization or articles of incorporation, which are for the most part a simple form. Your operating agreement and bylaws can be as short or as long as you want them to be. And these are the documents that are going to tell the public, tell everyone who can sign on behalf of that company, how that company is managed, how decisions are made, and all of that. Now, that operating agreement, those bylaws do not get published in the state of Michigan. They are not public record. So if you want to know who can sign on behalf of an LLC, there is no place where you can just look that information up. You can confirm with the state of Michigan that it has been registered and that it's been created, but that company's operating agreement or bylaws won't usually be publicly available. Let's take a look at limited liability companies. So when we're talking about entities that can hold title, limited liability companies or LLCs are one of the most popular kinds. They're simple and easy to form, and they're very easy to manage on a paperwork standpoint. So what do we need to do? The first thing we always want to think about is that LLCs are state-created entity. They're generally not recognized by the IRS. They're classified as a disregarded entity. So why does that matter? It certainly matters for tax filing purposes. You've got to pick a method and stick with that, and you have to choose how you want to file your taxes. However, from a real estate perspective, if you have federal tax liens and you have a sole member LLC, oftentimes people believe that because the property is held in an LLC, that those federal tax liens don't attach to the property. But because that sole member LLC is classified as a disregarded entity with the IRS, those liens against you personally also attach to your sole member LLC. So when we're dealing in real estate, we actually do care a lot if the property is held by an LLC, whether or not it's a sole member LLC or a multi-member LLC. And as a friendly reminder, when we're talking LLC, we're talking limited liability benefits, right? That's the whole name behind it. So a lot of times there is some confusion and everyone thinks that multi-member LLCs and sole member LLCs share the same benefits, but they in fact do not. So as we're dealing with LLCs that are holding title, what are some of the things that we want to look for? Number one, we want to make sure that it's active and in good standing. How do I do that? I'm going to look on LARA, right? I'm going to look on LARA, which is the Michigan entity that keeps all of that information. I'm going to be looking for articles of organization. I'm going to be looking to see if it's member managed or manager managed. And one of the things I can see on that article of organization is who is the registered agent. Now, so frequently, people misunderstand the significance of a registered agent. And the true use of a registered agent is so that on public record, we are telling everyone in Michigan, if you want to sue this LLC, this is the person that you have to serve. The registered agent is purely a person located or an entity located in Michigan where that LLC can receive service. It does not mean that they are the signer. It does not mean that they own the company. It's just a place where you can serve legal documents to on behalf of the LLC. Now, as we're looking at our LLC, remember we're evaluating, is it a sole member or a multi-member LLC as well? So if it's a sole member, that really means there's only one member. That should be our signer. And again, Michigan laws tell us that if it's a sole member, we actually don't have to have an operating agreement. So we may sign something like a sole member affidavit, but the LLC is valid even without an operating agreement if it's a sole member LLC. Now, on the flip side, if it's a multi-member LLC, we need an operating agreement because we've got to still determine who can sign on behalf of that LLC. Is it one person? Is it three people? Is it a manager? Who is it? So we want to make sure we know, is it a sole member LLC or is it a multi-member LLC? The next type of entity we want to look at are corporations. Corporations are another entity that are regulated by the state of Michigan. They are recognized by the IRS, and all of our corporations have to be registered with the state. You can check LARA just like you would for LLCs. And we're again looking on LARA to make sure that they are active, in good standing, but we're looking for articles of incorporation now instead of the articles of organization. We're also looking for bylaws now. Bylaws are going to tell us who can sign on behalf of a corporation. So a corporation is not going to have an operating agreement. A corporation is going to have bylaws. If a company is holding a piece of property, what are the things we need to think about as we're preparing for closing, as we're getting ready to have our purchase agreement signed? Number one, who's going to sign my purchase agreement? I'm going to need to know who has the authority to sign on behalf of this LLC or corporation. So who are the authorized signers? And in order to see who the authorized signers are, remember we're going to need an operating agreement or our bylaws or bylaw resolution, something to that effect. We need a document showing that our seller, the individual standing in front of us, is able to sign our purchase agreement and subsequently deeds and closing documents. We also want to make sure that that entity was correctly created. So we'll want to check public records, want to check LARA, make sure we've got our articles, either our articles of organization or articles of incorporation. As we're preparing our purchase agreement and we're looking at our negotiation terms, we want to make sure that we're reviewing the type of deed that is issued. So if we have an LLC or a corporation in title, there's a chance that the person sitting in front of us who's getting ready to sign this purchase agreement has never lived in that property. So we want to confirm, are you comfortable signing a warranty deed? Because our purchase agreement is going to dictate the type of deed that is provided. So before we sign a purchase agreement and agree to a deed, we want to make sure that we have that conversation with the client. Are you comfortable signing a warranty deed, or do we maybe want to provide a covenant deed? And then we also want to consider the type of title insurance that we're providing and whether or not we'll be providing a owner's policy with standard exceptions or without standard exceptions. If we're providing a policy without standard exceptions, there are some additional affidavits that our seller is going to need to sign. And again, if they have never lived in the property, they may not be comfortable signing off on all of that information, and it may be a better option to offer a policy with standard exceptions. The next thing we want to think about as we're preparing for closing, we're working with our seller who's holding property in a company, is what is the correct tax ID number or social security number that is going to be used at the time of closing for that 1099-S. So is this a pass-through entity? Is it maybe an LLC and the seller is going to be using their own personal social security number? Or is this an entity that has its own TIN? We want to make sure we know what that TIN is before the closing. We want to get our client prepared. We want to make sure that they have that tax ID number available and ready. And another thing we want to think about is making sure that our client has a bank account in the name of the company. So at the time of closing, when our seller is going to get their proceeds, we need to make sure that they have a bank account that they can deposit that money into. So make sure that they have a bank account in the name of the company. Whew, that was a lot. Thanks for sticking with me to the end. I hope you learned some really valuable information today. If you've got any questions about your scenario or general questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, or give me a call or email directly and I'm happy to help. If you're ready to work with us, click the link below to start your order. Thanks for hanging out today. We'll see you soon.